maps of early modern England, there were countless small islands dotting the coasts. Some so small they were hardly more than shoals, others large enough to support farms, chapels, or small fishing communities. They were fragile worlds, perched between sea and land, often left forgotten by the lords of the mainland, but essential to the people who lived on them. One such island, remembered only in fragments and whispers, lay in the treacherous waters of the Bristol Channel. By the start of the 17th century, it was already old in memory, an island that bore sheep, hardy crops, and a scattering of families who had chosen the sea's edge over the bustle of the mainland. For them, the ocean was not an enemy, but a neighbor, unpredictable yet sustaining. But the Bristol Channel was unlike any other stretch of coast in Europe. Its tides were monstrous, its range among the greatest on earth. Twice daily, the sea surged in and out with terrifying force, exposing vast mudflats and swallowing them again within hours. To live on an island in such waters was to live with constant vigilance, and yet generations managed it. They built homes on raised mounds, tended their flocks, and fished the silver shoals. Children grew up with salt in their hair, knowing that the rhythm of the sea was the rhythm of their lives. No one then could have imagined that one night, that rhythm would break. The year was 1607. England, under the rule of King James I, was restless with change. New colonies across the Atlantic, whispers of religious plots at home, and the cautious steps of a monarch still new to his throne. On the coasts, however, these grand concerns mattered little. What mattered was weather, tide, and harvest. The winter of 1606-07 had been fierce. Bitter winds clawed at the channel, and storms battered the coastlines of Wales and Somerset. The people of the island, hardened as they were, huddled in their cottages, listening to the sea gnaw at its borders. They had endured storms before. None had swept them away. But the night of January 30th, 1607, was different. It began with the sound, low, guttural, and unfamiliar. Not the usual howl of a gale, nor the crash of waves upon rocks, but a deeper, more terrible roar. Those awake that night would later say it sounded like the earth itself was groaning, as though the sea had become a beast awakened from centuries of slumber. It was not the tide as they knew it, nor the storm as they feared it. It was something else, something greater. On the horizon, unseen in the dark, a wave was rising. Some later said it was a tidal surge born of a storm, others that it was a tsunami from a far-off earthquake. Whatever its cause, it was vast, its walls of water driven by forces beyond comprehension. As it raced through the channel, it gathered speed and height, funneling into the narrowing waters until it became an unstoppable wall of death. When it struck, it did not come gently like the tide, nor gradually like a storm surge. It came all at once. The wave rose above the cottages, tore through the fields, and swallowed the island in a single blow. Houses were splintered like kindling, sheep and cattle tossed into the black water, families pulled screaming into the night. In moments, the island was gone, not merely flooded, but erased. Where once there had been homes, there was only sea. Where once there had been land, there was only darkness. The survivors, few if any, were never counted. Some may have clung to debris and been swept into the currents, their bodies washing ashore days later on the coasts of Somerset or Glamorgan. Others may have perished unseen, vanishing forever beneath the tide. The island itself, once a place of life, vanished into memory. When dawn came, the sea rolled innocently over the place where it had been, as though it had never existed at all. Word of the disaster spread quickly, not just because of the island, but because the wave had not stopped there. It surged inland for miles along the coasts of Somerset and South Wales, drowning villages, wrecking churches, and leaving corpses tangled in hedgerows. In some places it carried salt water so far into the land that fields were ruined for years. Chroniclers claimed that as many as 2,000 souls perished in the flood, and though numbers in old accounts are often exaggerated, the devastation was undeniable. But it was the island, gone without a trace, that haunted the imagination most. In taverns and churches, in whispered tales and half-remembered prayers, people spoke of it as if it had been cursed, swallowed by God's wrath. Some connected it with Avalon, the mystical island of Arthurian legend, suggesting that perhaps the sea had finally reclaimed what never truly belonged to mortals. Others swore they had seen strange lights above the waters in the nights after, as though the spirits of the drowned still walked where their cottages once stood. The mapmakers erased it soon enough. By the end of the 17th century, few traces of its name remained. But its story endured, carried in fragments through folklore, remembered as the island that disappeared in a single night. What vanished in that moment was more than land. It was a community, a world, a fragile defiance of the sea that had endured for generations, snuffed out in an instant. And for those who lived on the coasts, the lesson was unforgettable. The sea, patient and vast, takes what it will when it wills. No crown, no prayer, no wall could stop it. And so the story begins, not with the island as it is remembered in myth, but with the roar of water in the night, the screams of families swallowed whole, and the silence of dawn upon an empty sea. Dawn revealed the scope of the devastation. Along the coasts of Somerset, South Wales, and Gloucestershire, survivors stumbled out of half-ruined cottages, their faces pale with shock, their bodies shivering in soaked rags. The flood had not only swept away an island, but had clawed miles inland, turning farmland into brine-scorched marsh. Salt water still pooled in the furrows of fields. Dead livestock floated against hedgerows, and the corpses of the drowned lay where the torrent had flung them, on riverbanks, against church walls, or caught in the branches of trees. The chroniclers of 1607 struggled to describe the horror. They wrote of a wave that came suddenly, without wind or tempest. A surge so high that men on horseback drowned, their riders swept off before they could even dismount. In Cardiff, Chepstow and Burnham-on-Sea, hundreds were reported dead. In the parish records of villages, the flood was listed with chilling brevity, drowned by the flowing of the sea. But the greatest mystery was the island. When the waters withdrew, nothing remained. The people on the mainland who had known its shepherds, who had traded for wool or salted fish, rowed out to see what had become of it. They found only turbulent water, no mound of earth, no stump of cottage, not even the bones of a drowned ox. It was as if the sea had swallowed it whole, refusing to give even a fragment back. To those who had lost family across that water, the absence was unbearable. No graves to mark, no ruins to rebuild, only an eternal void where once there had been life. For some, the flood was a divine judgment. In sermons delivered across England and Wales, ministers declared that God had sent the deluge as punishment for sin. They cited Noah's flood as precedent, warning congregations that the Almighty would not hesitate to scourge the disobedient. Pamphlets circulated describing the wave as an omen of England's failings, its religious strife, its greed, its pride. Others sought more earthly explanations. Mariners who had seen the ocean in fury spoke of storm surges, when strong winds coincided with high tide, pushing the sea far beyond its limits. But there was something unsettling about the speed of the wave. Too fast, too sudden, too violent. Whispers arose of an earthquake beneath the sea, perhaps in distant Portugal or Ireland, unleashing a tsunami that funneled into the Bristol Channel with deadly precision. Even today, scholars debate the truth. Some argue for a massive storm surge, driven by fierce southwesterly winds and high tide, a phenomenon not unknown in the Channel. Others insist the accounts better fit a tsunami, born of seismic upheaval far away. Whatever the cause, the island's fate was the same: annihilation. In the years that followed, people rebuilt what they could on the mainland. Churches were repaired, though some never recovered their flocks. Farmers attempted to reclaim their fields, but the salt rendered the soil useless for seasons. A famine followed in parts of Somerset and South Wales, compounding the misery. Families who had lived for generations on the same land were forced to beg or leave, scattering into towns to become nameless laborers. And still, the story of the vanished island haunted the imagination. At first it was told soberly, as history. Men recalled the names of the families who had lived there, how many sheep grazed its pastures, how the cottages had looked from the mainland. But as decades passed, the details grew hazy, and myth began to take root. By the mid-17th century, some claimed the island had never been truly ordinary. They said it had been Avalon, the fabled isle of King Arthur, where the wounded king was borne away to heal. If Arthur had indeed slept beneath that soil, then perhaps the sea had risen to take back what was never meant for mortal habitation. Others spoke of curses, of spectral monks wandering the waves at night, of bells that could be heard tolling from beneath the water when storms swept the channel. Travelers passing through the region in the 18th century were shown the waters where the island had been. Locals would point to the restless currents, shake their heads, and mutter that nothing could be built there again. The sea remembers, they would say, and it keeps what it takes. This merging of fact and myth was natural, for the human mind could not bear the randomness of such destruction. To say that the sea rose without reason, to admit that the lives of entire families were extinguished in an instant with no purpose, was too bleak. Better to believe it had meaning, that it was punishment, prophecy, or legend come alive. In this way the vanished island lived on, not in soil or stone, but in imagination. Yet, beneath the tales, there was grief. For those whose ancestors had perished, the story was not distant myth, but raw memory. Mothers told their children of the relatives who had drowned. Fathers warned their sons never to underestimate the sea. And in parish registers, the year 1607 remained marked by an unnatural spike in deaths, a silent testament to the wave that had swept through. And so, an island was erased not only from maps, but from Earth itself, leaving only the echo of its name and the weight of its absence. The people of the Bristol Channel would never forget that night. Each time the tide swelled high, each time the wind moaned across the flats, they remembered the roar in the darkness, the scream of those caught in the flood, and the silence of the sea the morning after. What was once life became legend, and what was once land became sea. As decades slid into centuries, the flood of 1607 became something more than history. It became a living scar carried in the voices of those who retold it, reshaped and reforged with each generation, until fact and fable blurred like salt spray over glass. Children growing up along the Somerset levels and the Welsh coasts were told, not simply of a flood, but of a sea that rose with intention, a wave that came as a judgment or as a messenger. In some tales it was God's hand sweeping the coast clean of wickedness. In others, it was the devil breaking free from his chains deep beneath the earth, shaking the seabed until the water leapt to devour villages whole. And in the whispers of bards and storytellers, the missing island became the most dangerous of myths, the Isle of Avalon itself, swallowed at last not by time, but by a single, terrible night. There were those who spoke of seeing lights beneath the water, lanterns flickering deep below, as though cottages still stood in a drowned village, their inhabitants cursed to walk eternally in silence. Fishermen swore that on stormy nights they could hear the tolling of bells, the faint hum of voices chanting Latin hymns, or the muffled lowing of cattle from beneath the waves. Others claimed the sea over the vanished island was unnaturally restless, as though the ocean itself remembered the land it had taken and would never again be still above it. Maps of the 17th century sometimes marked phantom isles in the channel, sketches of land that no longer existed but that memory could not relinquish, a testament to the way trauma lingers longer than truth. But alongside the myths were the scars written into the soil. Farmers fought bitterly with the salt-poisoned earth. Year after year, crops failed where once fields had been rich, and those who had survived the wave carried famine in their wake. Old men would shake their heads at the sight of parched fields and mutter that the sea had cursed the land as well as the people. In towns like Cardiff and Chepstow, memorial services were still held for decades, sermons warning that without repentance the Almighty might loose his waters once more. The drowned island became a cautionary tale, a weapon of preachers, a grim reminder of divine wrath as much as natural peril. Yet among scholars, curiosity gnawed. Could the wave have been a tsunami, they asked, born of some seismic convulsion far out in the Atlantic? Could it have been a storm surge, the sea whipped by winds until it surged like a beast unchained? The truth was elusive, for the evidence was only in words. The chronicles of terrified survivors, the parish records of the dead, the whispered oral histories of villages too small to make the maps of kings. Modern minds seek causes, ancient ones sought meaning. Both were left unsatisfied. The vanished island, however, refused to stay silent. Writers in the centuries that followed began to graft legend onto the memory, binding it to the old Celtic stories of drowned lands and sunken kingdoms. In Welsh lore there was Cantre Gwaelod, the great kingdom supposedly swallowed by the sea when its negligent prince let the floodgates fall open. In Cornish tales there was Lyonesse, the fabled land where Arthur's kin fought and perished, now lying beneath the waves off Land's End. And now, in the Bristol Channel, the story of the vanished island joined this chain of ghostly geographies, places where men had once walked but now fish swam, where bells tolled underwater and the sea was a graveyard without stones. What had been a night of terror became a vessel for cultural longing and fear. Avalon, the land of Arthur's rest, was said by some to have been the island that drowned that night, as though the sea had finally claimed the myth for itself. To others, the flood was punishment for pride. The islanders had mocked God, had lived sinfully, had refused to pay church tithe, and the water came to scourge them from the earth. Even into the 18th and 19th centuries, travellers to the Bristol Channel would be told of the wave, shown the restless waters, warned never to underestimate the sea's appetite. And beneath the myths lay the inescapable truth that human life is fragile, that land itself is not eternal, and that in a single night the earth can betray its children. To remember the vanished island was to remember the terror of helplessness, the sound of rushing water, the sight of a horizon erased. The people who rebuilt their homes never forgot that they stood on borrowed time, that the sea was not a boundary but a predator, biding its hours until it rose again. By the dawn of the modern era, the vanished island had become almost untraceable, lost not just to water but to history's erosion. Its name was uncertain, its outline unrecorded, its memory half myth, half mourning. Yet in the folk memory of Somerset, Gloucestershire and South Wales, the story lingered, told by grandmothers at firesides, whispered by fishermen watching the tide, woven into songs and sermons alike. The flood of 1607 was not the first time the sea had risen, nor would it be the last, but it was perhaps the most haunting, for it had taken not merely life and land, but certainty itself, leaving in its wake a void where once there had been solid earth. A void that could only be filled with stories, for history abhors silence, and so the drowned are given voices through legend, their absence transformed into myth. And though centuries have passed and maps no longer mark the missing island, the sea still holds it. And the people who live along the channel still look out on stormy nights and wonder, what else might the ocean take, without warning, without reason, without mercy? By the time 2 centuries had passed, the vanished island was no longer remembered as geography, but as parable. In taverns along the Welsh coast, sailors would tell of the night when the water rose higher than church steeples, when men clung to drifting beams only to be dragged under by the pull of unseen hands. The flood of 1607 was retold with every storm that battered the channel, its horror woven into a pattern far older than Christianity itself. For to the people of Britain and Brittany, to the Celts who sang of drowned kingdoms and lost lands, this was not merely disaster. It was continuity. It was proof that the sea always collects its debts. Cantre Gwaelod in Wales, Lyonesse in Cornwall, Cowais in Brittany. Each was said to have sunk beneath the waves for reasons both moral and mysterious. Some fell through sin, others through neglect, others through the inexorable hunger of the ocean. Now the drowned island of 1607 joined them, less a place than a warning. No matter how strong the walls, how high the dikes, how devout the prayers, no land was safe. It was a truth the Dutch understood in their struggle against the North Sea, a truth whispered across the Baltic, a truth the Bristol Channel had carved in blood. The vanished island was not unique. It was part of a larger, older pattern of memory in which water was judge, executioner, and eraser. Yet for all the sermons and sailors' tales, there lingered another, quieter legacy: silence. Records of the flood still exist, brief notations in parish books, the stark testimony of survivors. But the island itself left no writing, no charter, no will. The men and women who lived there are remembered only in the absence of their names, their voices erased as surely as their cottages. They exist now only as shadows beneath legend, as phantoms glimpsed in the imagination of later storytellers. And in this silence lies the true terror, that entire communities can vanish not only from earth but from history, and all that remains is a whisper of their existence carried on salt wind. Modern science would one day seek answers. In the 20th century, scholars debated, was it truly a tsunami, born of an earthquake or landslide in the Atlantic? Or was it a storm surge, a brutal convergence of tide, wind, and pressure that drove the sea inland like a weapon? Soil samples taken from the level show layers of salt and sand, proof of inundation, but the cause remains unresolved. Theories abound, but the ocean, indifferent and vast, keeps its secret. It offers hints, but never certainty, for the sea does not confess, it buries. But while scholars probe for cause, the people of the Channel have always lived with effect. The memory of 1607 lurked beneath later floods, beneath warnings that the land was not truly theirs. Even now, when the Severn estuary swells under spring tide, when the mudflats vanish beneath white-crested waves, there are those who feel unease. The earth trembles faintly, the water churns, and the question rises unbidden: could it happen again? Could the sea one day claim another village, another island, another home, with the same sudden violence? The answer is yes. The answer has always been yes. For the flood of 1607 was not an anomaly, but a truth written into the nature of coastlines. It was a reminder that civilization is fragile, perched on shifting borders, at the mercy of forces beyond human command. What disappeared that night was not just an island, but the illusion of permanence. It showed that a home could be erased in minutes, a community swallowed without trace, a memory reduced to myth. It showed that the sea does not negotiate, does not forgive, does not return. And so the story endures, a paradox of history and folklore. It endures not because of the land that remains, but because of the land that is gone. It endures in every tale of bells tolling beneath the water, in every chart that marks a phantom isle, in every sermon that speaks of wrath, in every fisherman's glance at the restless channel. It endures because the people who lived through it could not forget, and those who came after refused to let forgetting rob the dead of even that last echo. The vanished island may never be found. Its soil may rest beneath silt, its cottages long dissolved, its graves scattered. But it is more present than many places still visible on maps. It exists in the collective memory of a coastline, in the nightmares of its descendants, in the unease that comes with the roar of wind against tide. And perhaps that is the cruelest truth, that in a single night the sea can make myth from flesh, silence from voices, eternity from absence, that men and women, real as the earth beneath their feet, can be transformed into legend not by choice, not by glory, but by the indifference of water. The sea does not remember names, but it remembers hunger, and it keeps what it takes